August 8th, 1944, 12:47 in the afternoon. A Sherman sits motionless behind a hedgerow. Engine off, hatches sealed. The gunner's hand rests on the traverse. The loader holds a shell against his chest. 30 meters ahead, a gap in the Bocage. Beyond it, open ground. Inside the turret, Sergeant Callum Thorne counts his breaths. 1, 2, 3. His eye pressed to the sight. His world reduced to crosshairs and distance markers. Beside him, Private Dex Hartley grips the 17-pounder shell. 23 kilograms of British engineering, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow. In the commander's position, Lieutenant Griffin Webb listens. Just listens. To the wind moving through the hedgerow. To the distant rumble of artillery. To the sound that hasn't come yet. They have been waiting 11 minutes. Then the sound comes. Tracks grinding against earth, metal treading stone. The unmistakable rhythm of a Panther, 60 tons of German armor moving down a sunken lane 400 meters north. Webb's voice, barely a whisper. Stand by. Thorne doesn't move, doesn't blink. The Panther's turret appears through the gap. Angular, brutal, the long 75mm barrel sweeping left to right, hunting. Range 480, Webb says. Center mass. Identified, Thorne responds. Hartley lifts the shell, slides it home. The breech closes with a metallic snap. Up. Thorne's finger tightens on the trigger. The Panther stops. Turret traversing toward them. The German gunner searching. Searching. Thorne fires. The 17-pounder roars. The entire Sherman rocks backward. Inside the turret, the sound is violence. Pure concussive violence that rattles bones and stops thought. 480 meters away, the armor-piercing round strikes the Panther's turret ring. The weakest point, the seam between turret and hull, the shell penetrates. Inside the Panther, German ammunition ignites. The explosion tears through the fighting compartment, blows the turret 10 feet into the air. The hull splits open. Black smoke pours from every seam. The crew inside never saw their killer. Webb's voice cuts through the ringing in their ears. Target destroyed. Driver, reverse. Get us out of here. The Sherman's engine roars to life. They pull back into the tree line. 60 seconds from shot to concealment. The doctrine they drilled until it became reflex. Thorne releases the breath he didn't know he was holding. Hartley leans against the turret wall, shaking. Webb marks the kill on his map. Number 13 for this crew. Unlucky number, lucky kill. But the question hangs in the cramped turret, unspoken. How did it come to this? How did Canadian farm boys and fishermen end up hunting panthers in the hedgerows of Normandy? The answer begins 32 days earlier, June 7th, 1944. Ory-sur-Orne. Day 2 of the invasion. The Sherbrooke Fusiliers rolled into the Norman countryside with confidence. They had trained for 2 years, rehearsed the landings, studied the maps. They knew their Shermans, reliable, mass-produced, easy to maintain. What they didn't know was the Bocage. The hedgerows dated back centuries, dense walls of earth and root standing 2 meters high. Between them, sunken lanes barely wide enough for a single vehicle, ancient, impenetrable. Every intersection a natural choke point. The Germans had been there for months. They knew every firing lane, every ambush point, every kill zone. 14 Shermans advanced in column with the North Nova Scotia Highlanders, infantry walking alongside the armor. The standard doctrine, tanks and infantry mutually supporting. They entered the village at 06:30. The first Sherman exploded before anyone saw the enemy, one moment rolling forward, the next a flash of impact on the hull front. The tank shuddered, stopped. Smoke began pouring from the engine deck. Hatches flew open, crew bailing out, uniforms already burning. The second Sherman died 6 seconds later. Same result. Penetrating hit from an unseen attacker. Fire. Crew screaming as they tried to escape. The column stopped. Commanders scanned for targets. Gunners traversed turrets left and right. They saw nothing, just hedgerows, just the maze of green walls. A third Sherman took a hit, this one through the side armor. The shell punched clean through, ignited the ammunition stored inside. The explosion blew the turret completely off the hull. It landed upside down 15 feet away. No one inside survived. The infantry scattered, dove into ditches, pressed themselves against the hedgerows. Machine gun fire tore through the morning air. Mortars began falling. The North Nova Scotia Highlanders were pinned, trapped in the open. From concealed positions at the lane ends, German Panthers fired with methodical precision. They could see the Shermans. The Shermans could not see them. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. In 4 minutes, 6 Shermans burned. 28 men died in their tanks or in the desperate seconds after bailing out. The surviving crews retreated in chaos. The infantry, cut off and surrounded, had no choice. Over 100 Canadian soldiers raised their hands. The fighting ended. The war crime began. 3 hours later, reconnaissance found the bodies. 18 Canadian prisoners, hands tied behind their backs, shot in the head, executed. The 12th SS Panzer Division did not take prisoners. This was the reality Canadian tankers learned on the second day of the invasion. The Shermans they trusted were outmatched. The enemy they faced gave no quarter, and the ground itself was an ally to the defenders. Major David Hughes stood in the command post that evening, studying the casualty reports. His regiment had lost 11 tanks, 28 dead, 40 wounded, 107 missing, presumed captured, in 3 days. The numbers told the story clearly enough. At any range beyond 300 meters, the Panther would kill them before they could fight back. In the Bocage, where sight lines rarely exceeded 400 meters, it didn't matter. The Panthers waited at the lane ends, hull down, only their turrets visible. They picked off Shermans like targets on a range. Hughes set down the reports. Outside, the replacement crews were arriving. Boys with 6 weeks of training. They would climb into Shermans tomorrow. Half of them would be dead within a week. Someone knocked on the doorframe. "Sir, the Firefly conversions have arrived." Hughes looked up. "How many?" 4, 1 per troop as requested. "Get the crews briefed. I want them operational by morning." "Yes, sir." The officer hesitated. "Sir, the men are asking, will it make a difference?" Hughes studied the map, the Bocage terrain that had become their graveyard. "It better," he said, "because if it doesn't, we're all dead by August." The Sherman Firefly looked wrong. That was the first thing Thorne thought when he saw it. The barrel was too long. Jutted out past the bow of the tank by almost 2 meters. Made the whole vehicle front-heavy. Unbalanced. Inside the turret, it was worse. The 17-pounder anti-tank gun took up nearly all the available space. The breech was massive, the recoil mechanism brutal. There was barely room for 3 men, and even then they had to move like they were dancing around each other. But the gun could kill. Thorne had served in the artillery before transferring to armor. He knew the 17-pounder. It was the same weapon they used in the towed anti-tank batteries. In North Africa and Italy, it had proven capable of defeating Tigers. Now the British had mounted it inside a Sherman turret. The engineering wasn't elegant. The ammunition capacity dropped from 75 rounds to 60. The shells weighed 23 kilograms each, compared to 6.8 for the standard 75mm. Loading them required strength and timing. The recoil was punishing. During the first firing trials, the loader in another crew took the breech to the shoulder, broke his collarbone, had to be invalided out. But at 500 meters, the armor-piercing round could punch through 140 millimeters of steel. At the combat ranges in the Bocage, often under 300 meters, it could defeat any German tank from any angle. "This is our edge," Webb told the crew during their first briefing. "We get 1 Firefly per troop, 4 standard Shermans, 1 of us. That makes us the priority." Hartley, 20 years old and still green from Saskatchewan, raised his hand. "Priority for what, sir?" "Priority target," Webb said. "The Germans know what this gun can do. They'll hunt us specifically." The silence in the briefing room was complete. Corporal Leif Brennan, commander of one of the standard Shermans, broke it. "So we're bait?" Webb shook his head. "No, we're the killers. The 75s are bait. They draw fire, expose the Panthers. We take the kill shot from concealment." "And if the Panthers see us first?" Brennan asked. "Then we die," Webb said simply. "Same as before, but at least now we have a chance to shoot back." The training began the next morning. Loading drills, over and over. Hartley's hands blistered, then calloused. His back screamed from the weight of the shells. But his times dropped. 15 seconds, 12, 10, 8. Camouflage techniques. They painted the rear half of the barrel with counter-shading to break up the silhouette, added foliage netting, practiced positioning the Firefly at the rear of formations, shielded by the standard Shermans. The goal was simple: survive long enough to take the shot. On June 20th, they got their first kill, a Panther, hull down at the end of a lane near Christot. 520 meters, the standard Shermans drew its attention. Thorne tracked it through his sight, waited for the turret to traverse away, fired. The 17-pounder hit the Panther's side armor. The shell penetrated the engine compartment. Fuel ignited. The crew bailed out, uniforms already smoking. Hartley had loaded the shell in 7.8 seconds. They reversed into cover before the German infantry could respond. That night, Webb marked the kill on the turret, a single white ring. The crew celebrated with cigarettes and bad coffee. But the intelligence reports arriving at headquarters told a different story. Ultra intercepts had decoded German radio traffic. Orders circulating through the Panzer units. Priority target. Destroy long-barreled Shermans first. Firefly designation. Identify by extended gun. Engage before standard variants. The Germans had recognized the threat within days. Now every Firefly crew carried a death sentence. The distinctive silhouette made them marked men. More camouflage, more positioning at the troop rear, more reliance on standard Shermans to shield them until the moment of engagement. It helped, but not enough. The casualty reports kept coming. Firefly after Firefly identified and destroyed before they could take their shot. The crews who survived were the ones who became invisible, who mastered the art of the ambush, who learned to kill from concealment and disappear before the enemy could respond. Thorne's crew survived, and with each kill they learned. By early July they had 7 confirmed. The white rings circled the turret. Other crews started calling them lucky. Thorne didn't believe in luck. He believed in training, in discipline, in doing the job right the first time because there wouldn't be a second chance. But the larger problem remained. The Firefly addressed the firepower gap, gave Canadian crews a weapon that could kill Panthers and Tigers at range. But it didn't solve the tactical problem. The Germans still chose when and where to fight, still owned the prepared positions, still had the advantage of terrain and time. Canadian armor was still dying, just slower. The crews needed more than a better gun. They needed a better plan. Lieutenant General Dominic Ashford stood in the operations tent, studying the maps of Normandy spread across the table, 40 years old. Youngest corps commander in the Allied armies, he had led Canadian forces in Sicily and Italy. He understood armored warfare, and he understood they were losing. The casualty reports told the story. 1,800 Canadian casualties in the first 9 days, armored regiments taking losses at rates that couldn't be sustained. The replacement pipeline already straining. The tactical pattern was clear. Daylight attacks into prepared German positions, predictable routes through the Bocage, Panthers and Tigers waiting in hull-down positions with overlapping fields of fire. Pre-registered German artillery zeroed on every approach. It was a formula for attrition. And in a war of attrition, the defender with superior tanks and terrain always won. Ashford's staff stood around the table, waiting. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we have been fighting the war the Germans want us to fight, on their terms, in their killing ground, at times of their choosing." He traced a line on the map. "Every daylight attack follows the same pattern. We advance, they wait, they kill us at range. We withdraw and count the cost, the ill." A British liaison officer cleared his throat. "General, with respect, frontal assault is doctrine. We cannot simply—" Ashford cut him off. "Doctrine written by men who have never seen Bocage, who have never watched Panthers destroy an entire company from positions we cannot even locate." Silence. "The Germans own the daylight," Ashford continued. "So we take the night." The staff exchanged glances. "Sir," the British officer said carefully, "armoured formations cannot coordinate in darkness. Tanks will collide, units will lose direction, friendly fire becomes inevitable." "Then we create light," Ashford said, "and we engineer solutions to each problem you have mentioned." He placed a photograph on the table. Searchlights mounted on flatbed trucks. Artillery searchlights, positioned 5 kilometers behind the front line, angled at low cloud cover. The beams bounce off the clouds and create diffused illumination. Artificial moonlight. Another photograph. Anti-aircraft guns. Bofors batteries firing tracer rounds on fixed bearings, navigation markers visible from kilometers away. Our columns follow the tracers like highways. Maps with compass bearings marked. Compass mounts on every tank hull, radio discipline protocols, synchronized timing down to the minute, phosphorescent markers on lead vehicles. The staff began taking notes. "This is Operation Totalize," Ashford said. "A night armoured assault at corps scale. We break their line when they cannot see us coming, when their pre-registered artillery cannot find us, when their Panthers cannot engage at range." The British officer started to object again. Ashford raised a hand. "I am not asking for approval. I am informing you of the plan. If it fails, the responsibility is mine. If it succeeds, the credit is Canada's." He looked at each officer in turn. "Begin preparations. Rehearsals start tomorrow night. We execute in 4 weeks." The meeting ended. The officers filed out. Only Ashford remained studying the maps. He knew what the plan required. Perfect coordination, perfect timing, perfect execution under conditions that had never been attempted at this scale. But he also knew what would happen if they didn't try. More Shermans burning in the Bocage, more crews dying before they could learn, more replacements fed into a meat grinder with no end in sight. The Germans had superior tanks. Ashford would give his men superior tactics. And somewhere in that exchange, they would find a way to win. While Ashford planned the impossible, Canadian engineers were improvising the unprecedented. The problem was simple. Infantry could not cross open ground under fire. Machine guns and mortars shredded formations before they reached German positions. The casualties were unsustainable. The solution required rethinking what a tank could be. In the rear areas, obsolete vehicles sat in motor pools. M7 Priest self-propelled guns, their artillery role replaced by newer systems, ram tanks, Canadian-built but never seeing combat. Someone looked at them and saw potential. Strip the turret, reinforce the hull, build a troop compartment where the fighting compartment used to be, add armor plating, create doors that infantry could use to mount and dismount quickly. The first prototype looked like a nightmare. Welded steel and improvised angles. No manual, no doctrine, no precedent. But when they tested it, a full infantry section climbed inside. The doors closed. The vehicle rolled across 500 meters of open ground while machine guns fired at it. The rounds sparked off the armor. The infantry inside felt the impacts but remained untouched. At the objective, the doors opened. The section dismounted in 5 seconds, took cover, prepared to assault. Prepared. Corporal Yves Marchand, the Quebec infantry section leader who had volunteered for the test, stood beside the vehicle afterward. "Mon Dieu," he said, we can actually survive the approach." They named it the Kangaroo because it carried troops in a pouch of steel. Production began immediately. Engineers worked around the clock, converting every obsolete vehicle they could find. By early August, they had enough to carry an entire infantry brigade. No other Allied army had operationalized armored personnel carriers at this scale. The British were experimenting, the Americans were studying, the Canadians were building. Necessity, improvisation, innovation. The same forces that created the Firefly created the Kangaroo, and both would be tested in the night attack Ashford was planning. The rehearsals began in late June. The first night exercise was chaos. 2 tanks collided in the darkness despite the phosphorescent markers. 3 tanks got lost and ended up a kilometer off course. Infantry in the Kangaroos arrived 30 minutes late to their objectives. Radio discipline collapsed as units called for guidance. It was a disaster. Ashford didn't cancel the operation. He took notes, better markers, stricter radio protocols, more practice with compass navigation, tighter timing windows. They ran it again the next night. Better. Still not good enough. Again and again. By the end of July, the columns moved like clockwork. Tanks navigating by compass and tracer fire. Kangaroos delivering infantry exactly on schedule. Radio chatter, minimal and professional. It still seemed impossible, but now it seemed like an impossibility they might achieve. On August 5th, Ashford watched the final rehearsal from a ridge overlooking the training ground. His staff stood beside him. "They're ready," his chief of staff said. Ashford nodded slowly. "Set the date. August 7th, 2300 hours. "Yes, sir." The staff officer hesitated. "Sir, intelligence has new information. A Tiger battalion is moving into position south of Caen, led by SS Hauptsturmführer Alaric Hartmann." Ashford turned. "Hartmann, the one with the propaganda films?" "Yes, sir. Official record credits him with 114 Allied tanks destroyed, Eastern Front veteran, multiple decorations." "And the truth?" The intelligence officer shrugged. "Modern assessment suggests 80 to 100 kills, many shared or unverified, but he is skilled, and his men believe he is invincible." Ashford looked back at the training ground, at the tanks moving through the darkness, at the innovation his corps had forged from necessity. "Then we will teach them differently," he said quietly. "Inform the Firefly troops. If they encounter Hartmann's Tigers, engagement is priority." "Yes, sir." The officer left. Ashford remained on the ridge, watching the rehearsal. In 2 days they would attack, in darkness, with untested tactics, against an enemy who believed they could not be beaten. It would work, or it would fail spectacularly. But either way, the Canadians would fight on their own terms. For the first time since landing in Normandy, they would choose the time, choose the place, choose the method. The Germans were about to learn what that meant. August 7th, 1944. 2230 hours. South of Caen, in the darkness between the front lines and the artillery positions, over 1,000 armored vehicles waited. Shermans, Fireflies, Kangaroos carrying infantry, half-tracks, scout cars, an entire corps assembled in the night. Inside the tanks, crews sat in silence, engines off, radios silent, just waiting. Thorne sat in his gunner's position, eyes closed, not sleeping, just conserving energy. Beside him, Hartley checked and rechecked the ammunition. 17 rounds of armor-piercing, 17 chances. Webb studied his watch. The luminous hands crept toward 2300. 2 vehicles over, Corporal Leif Brennan commanded his standard Sherman, 75mm gun, lighter armor. He would be in the first wave, drawing fire, exposing targets. He knew the odds. Further back in the column, Sergeant Felix Cavanaugh sat in another Sherman, smoking his last cigarette before the attack. He had survived Sicily, survived Italy, now Normandy. Every battle, the odds got worse. In the Kangaroos, infantry section leader Yves Marchand briefed his men one final time. "We stay inside until the doors open, then we move fast, find cover, prepare to assault. C'est simple." One of his riflemen, barely 18, looked pale. "What if we get hit before we dismount?" Marchand met his eyes. "Then we burn, same as always, but at least we have armor between us and the machine guns." Not comforting, but honest. 2255. Webb's voice came over the radio, quiet, calm. "All crews, stand by." Engines roared to life. 1,000 engines. The sound rolled across the countryside like thunder. The Germans would hear it, would know something was coming, but they wouldn't know what, or where, or when. 2258. Thorne opened his eyes, pressed them against the gun sight. His world became crosshairs and darkness. 2259, 30 seconds, 20, 10. Then the night turned silver. 5 kilometers behind the front line, 200 searchlights ignited simultaneously, massive beams of light stabbing upward into the low cloud cover. The clouds caught the light, diffused it, scattered it across the sky. The battlefield transformed. Not daylight, not even twilight, something else entirely, a ghostly half-light that painted the landscape in shades of grey and silver. Enough to navigate, not enough for artillery to target accurately. Artificial moonlight. Thorne had seen the rehearsals, but this was different. This was real. The entire sky glowing like something from a dream or a nightmare. Then the tracers began. Bofors anti-aircraft guns firing on fixed bearings. Streams of luminous rounds arcing across the sky at precise angles. Red tracers marking one axis of advance, green marking another, white marking a third. Highways of fire. Webb's voice on the radio. "All stations, advance. Follow the markers. Maintain interval. Radio discipline." The column began to move. Thorne felt the Sherman lurch forward. The engine settled into a steady rhythm. Through the periscope, he watched the surreal landscape scroll past. Hedgerows painted silver, fields glowing, the tracers overhead like rivers of light showing them the way. It was the strangest thing he had ever seen. And it was working. The German sentries heard the engines, stood at their positions, straining to see into the darkness. The unnatural glow in the sky confused them. Was it flares? Illumination rounds? Then the ground began to shake. 1,000 tanks, moving in the night. The first German positions were overrun before they could radio for artillery. Canadian infantry dismounting from Kangaroos, assaulting trenches while the defenders were still trying to understand what was happening. The 89th Infantry Division holding the forward zone found itself facing armor in the darkness. Their anti-tank guns couldn't see targets clearly enough for aimed fire. Their machine guns sparked uselessly off Sherman hulls. By midnight, the leading elements had penetrated 2 kilometers into German-held territory. By 0100, 4 kilometers. The breakthrough was real. Thorne's Firefly rolled through abandoned German positions, foxholes still warm, half-eaten meals left behind. The defenders had run. Over the radio, reports flooded in, minimal casualties, German resistance fragmenting. The impossible was happening. Brennan's Sherman led his troop through a village, houses dark, streets empty, the 75mm gun traversing left and right, searching for targets that weren't there. Then a Panzerfaust streaked from a window. The rocket-propelled grenade hit his Sherman's side armor, penetrated, the interior filled with shrapnel and fire. Brennan's gunner died instantly. Brennan and his driver bailed out, uniforms smoking. They rolled in the dirt, extinguishing the flames. The Sherman burned behind them. Brennan lay on the ground, watching his tank die. Third one he'd lost. He was out of tanks. An infantry NCO pulled him to his feet. "Can you walk?" Brennan nodded. "Then you're infantry now. Welcome to the war." Marchand's Kangaroo delivered his section to the outskirts of Rocancourt at 02:15. The doors opened. His men poured out, found cover behind a stone wall. German machine gun fire raked the position. Marchand's section returned fire, suppressed the gun, assaulted the position. Close quarters fighting, grenades, rifle fire, bayonets. When it ended, 4 of Marchand's men were wounded, 2 Germans dead, 5 surrendered. The survivors looked shocked, disoriented. They had been sleeping when the attack began. Now they were prisoners. Marchand's radio man called for medics, for both sides. The Kangaroo had delivered them alive. That alone was victory. By 0600 on August 8th, as dawn broke over Normandy, Canadian forces had advanced 6 kilometers. The German 89th Infantry Division was shattered. Entire battalions overrun or scattered. The breach was open. At Corps headquarters, Ashford received the reports with quiet satisfaction. The night attack had worked. The artificial moonlight. The navigation by tracer fire. The Kangaroos delivering infantry without crippling casualties. Innovation had defeated preparation. But he knew what came next. The Germans would counterattack. They had no choice. If the breach remained open, Canadian armor could exploit into the rear areas, cut supply lines, threaten the entire front. They would send their best. The intelligence officer entered the command post. "Sir, German radio traffic indicates major armor movement. 12th SS Panzer Division and 1st SS Panzer Division elements converging on the breakthrough. Tiger Battalion confirmed among them." "Hartmann?" "Yes, sir. Moving to Syntho sector." Ashford studied the map, marked the likely approach routes. "Get orders to the Firefly troops, defensive positions along these ridges. Hull down. Prepare for armored counterattack." "Yes, sir." The officer hesitated. "Sir, they'll be outnumbered." Ashford looked up. They'd been outnumbered since June, but now they have position, and they have guns that can kill tigers. He returned to the map. "Tell them to hold. Reinforcements will follow, but the Fireflies break the counterattack, or we lose the breakthrough." Thorne's crew reached their assigned position at 0830, a small orchard on rising ground near Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil. The trees provided concealment. The elevation provided sight lines down the approach road. Webb positioned the Firefly hull down behind an earth berm, only the turret visible, the engine deck and hull protected by the ground itself. "This is good," Webb said. "We can see 1,000 meters down that road. Anything coming from the north has to use it." Thorne traversed the gun, checked the sight picture, clean field of fire, Hartley stacked ammunition. Organized it for quick access. His hands were steady now. The farm boy from Saskatchewan had learned his trade. They waited. At other positions along the ridge, more Fireflies did the same. Sergeant Pax Drummond's crew from the British Columbia Regiment, Lieutenant Nico Vossler's crew from the Northamptonshire Yeomanry attached to Canadian Command. 7 Fireflies, spread across 3 kilometers of front. The intelligence said tigers were coming. The crews made ready. Alaric Hartmann stood in the cupola of his Tiger, studying the map. Around him, his battalion prepared to move. 3 Tigers in his immediate group, 8 more in the second echelon. Panthers from the 12th SS in support. Hartmann was 30 years old, an Eastern Front veteran. He had fought at Kursk, at Kharkov, survived battles that killed better men. The propaganda films made him a hero. Knight's Cross with oak leaves, the invincible ace, 114 kills claimed. Hartmann knew the truth, maybe 80, maybe 90, half of them shared with other tanks in his unit. The propaganda inflated everything. But he was good, he knew that much. He understood tank combat at an instinctive level. Read terrain, anticipated enemy movements, killed with efficiency, and he had never faced an opponent who could match his Tiger. The Sherman was a joke. 75mm gun that bounced off Tiger armor. He had killed dozens. These new long-barreled variants were more dangerous. The intelligence said so, but intelligence said a lot of things Hartmann would see for himself. At 0900, the column moved out, Tigers leading, Panthers following, infantry in half-tracks providing support. Their mission was simple: drive north, crush the Canadian breakthrough, restore the line. Hartmann expected to be in calm by nightfall. 1100 hours. Thorne listened to the sound. Engines, heavy engines. The deep rumble of armor moving on roads. Webb heard it too. Contact! Multiple vehicles. Estimate 2 kilometers north. The radio crackled. Other Firefly crews reporting the same. Thorne pressed his eye to the site. Scanned the road. Nothing yet. Hartley held a shell ready. 23 kilograms, waiting. The rumble grew louder. 1220 hours. A scout car appeared first. German, moving fast down the road. It passed through Thorne's field of fire and disappeared around a bend. Then nothing. 3 minutes. 5. 1227. The Tiger appeared. Thorne saw the bow first, then the hull. Massive, angular, the long 88mm gun traversing slowly left and right. Behind it, 2 more Tigers, behind them Panthers, a full armored column. Webb's voice was barely a whisper. Stand by, let them close. The lead Tiger continued forward, 600 meters. 550, 500. Thorne tracked it. Crosshairs on the turret front, breathing steady. 480 meters, Webb spoke. Gunner, target Tiger, center mass. Identified. Fire when ready. Thorne's world narrowed to the sight picture, the Tiger's turret, the crosshairs, the moment between breaths. He fired. The 17-pounder roared. The Sherman rocked. Inside the turret, the sound was violence. 600 meters to the right, Drummond's Firefly fired simultaneously. 800 meters to the left, Vossler's Firefly fired. 3 17-pounder rounds, launched within a half-second of each other, converging on 3 different Tigers. Thorne's round struck the lead Tiger's turret ring, the seam between turret and hull, the weakest point on the entire vehicle. The shell penetrated. Inside the Tiger, German ammunition detonated. The explosion tore through the fighting compartment, blew the turret 10 feet into the air. The blast killed the entire crew instantly, including Hauptsturmführer Alaric Hartmann. Drummond's round hit the second Tiger's side armor as it began to turn, penetrated the engine compartment. Fuel ignited. The crew bailed out, uniforms burning. Vossler's round struck the third Tiger frontally. The armor was too thick. The round deflected, but the impact jammed the turret traverse. The Tiger stopped, unable to fight effectively. The 3 Fireflies reversed into cover before the German column could respond. 11 seconds from first shot to concealment. The Panther commanders saw 3 Tigers destroyed or disabled in moments by an enemy they couldn't see, from positions they couldn't locate. The counterattack stalled, then collapsed. The Panthers retreated. The surviving Tiger withdrew. Infantry in half-tracks scattered into the hedgerows. Over the radio, reports flooded in, Tiger down, Tiger down. Multiple targets destroyed. But in the chaos, no one could determine which Firefly had killed which target. The Firefly silent and still, waiting for orders. "Did we get him?" Hartley asked. "The ace?" Webb was already on the radio, trying to piece together the engagement. 3 Tigers engaged, 3 Fireflies firing, multiple hits confirmed. He looked at Thorne. No way to know. And there wasn't. 3 17-pounder rounds fired within half a second, 3 Tigers hit. The historical record would debate for decades which crew killed Hartmann. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was simpler. The legend was dead. The invincible ace was burning in a field in Normandy. And for the first time since D-Day, German armor had broken against Canadian defenses. The German radio traffic told the story. Hartmann ist gefallen. Hartmann has fallen. In the 12th SS Panzer Division command post, the news spread like poison. Officers stared at maps, trying to understand. If Hartmann could die, anyone could die. The Panzers that had seemed invincible suddenly weren't. The Shermans that had seemed helpless suddenly had teeth. The counterattack to seal the breach never materialized. By 1400 hours, Canadian forces were consolidating their gains, reinforcements moving through the gap, supplies following. Ashford received the casualty reports lighter than expected. The night attack had minimized losses. The Firefly ambush had broken the German counterattack before it developed. On paper, it was a tactical victory. In reality, it was the beginning of the end for German forces in Normandy. August 14th, Operation Tractable launched, the second phase of the encirclement. Canadian and Polish forces driving south toward Falaise, American forces swinging north from the opposite direction. The objective was simple: trap the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army before they could escape. Thorne's crew was in the advance, Firefly still running, 13 confirmed kills marked on the turret. Hartley wounded now, shrapnel in his left leg, from a near miss 3 days prior, but he refused evacuation. "I can still load," he said, through gritted teeth. The fighting was different now, not set-piece battles, just grinding, village-to-village combat, German resistance fragmenting, units trying to retreat, getting caught, surrendering or dying. Brennan, now fighting as infantry after losing his tank, took a German prisoner near Trun. The Panther commander looked shell-shocked. "We thought we were winning," the German said in broken English. "In June we were winning." Brennan lit a cigarette, offered one to the prisoner. "So did we," he said. Marchand's infantry section fought through Chambois. House to house, room to room, his section took 40% casualties, but they held the position. The kangaroo that had delivered them there sat abandoned, tracks blown by a mine. But it had gotten them to the fight alive. That was all it needed to do. Kavanagh, transferred to a Firefly crew after his Sherman was destroyed, learned the 17-pounder in combat. His new crew accepted him without question. They needed an experienced tank commander. He needed a tank. In war, efficiency trumped sentiment. By August 19th, the pocket was closing. Canadian and Polish forces held Hill 262. Americans approached from the south. The gap between them was less than 5 kilometers. Inside that gap, 2 German armies tried to escape. And the killing began in earnest. The corridor of death, that's what the survivors would call it. A narrow gap between Trun and Chambois, roads clogged with vehicles, horse-drawn transport, infantry on foot, all trying to squeeze through before the pocket sealed. Allied artillery zeroed on the roads. Fired continuously, shells falling like rain. Allied aircraft strafed anything that moved. Canadian armor blocked escape routes. Engaged targets at point-blank range. It wasn't battle, it was execution. Thorne's Firefly sat at a crossroads near Saint-Lambert-sur-Dive. For 3 hours, German columns tried to break through. For 3 hours, the Firefly killed them. Panthers, half-tracks, trucks. Anything with armor or engine. Hartley loaded until his hands bled, until he could barely lift the shells. But he kept loading. Thorne fired until the gun barrel glowed, until the recoil mechanism began to overheat, but he kept firing. Webb called targets until his voice went hoarse, but he kept calling. At 1700 hours, the breakthrough attempts stopped. The gap was sealed. The pocket was closed. Inside, the remnants of 2 German armies waited for the end. Outside, Canadian crews slumped in their positions, too exhausted to celebrate. Thorne climbed out of the turret, sat on the hull, stared at nothing. Across the field, German vehicles burned, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The smoke rose in columns that merged into a single black cloud. Hartley joined him. Bandaged legs stretched out. Neither spoke. They had won. But looking at the burning landscape, it was hard to tell. August 21st, 1944. The Falaise pocket was sealed. The fighting had stopped. What remained was silence. And the dead. Thorne's crew walked through the corridor the morning after it ended. The Firefly sat 3 kilometers back. Engine finally shut down after 6 days of continuous operation. They moved on foot now. Through what the war had made, the first thing that struck them was the smell. Burned metal, burned rubber, burned flesh. All of it mixing in the August heat into something that made breathing difficult. The second thing was the scale. Destroyed vehicles stretched as far as they could see. Panthers with turrets blown off. Half-tracks crushed by their own retreating columns. Trucks accordion collapsed from artillery strikes. Horse-drawn wagons overturned, the horses still in harness, bloated in death. The German army still relied on horses. Tens of thousands of them. They lay among the wreckage in numbers that made the mechanical destruction seem small. Hartley stopped walking, leaned against a burned-out Panther. His wounded leg couldn't carry him further. "How many?" he asked quietly. Webb had the intelligence reports. Best estimate, 10,000 German dead inside the pocket, maybe 15, another 40 to 50,000 captured. And us? Normandy campaign total, 18,444 Canadian casualties, killed, wounded, missing. Thorne did the mathematics in his head. A third of the Canadian forces that landed in June, gone in 11 weeks. He looked at the destroyed German equipment, tried to calculate what those numbers meant, gave up. Some mathematics were beyond comprehension. They continued walking, past a Tiger intact except for the hole in its turret front. A 17-pounder hole, some Fireflies kill. Past a column of prisoners, German soldiers walking with hands on heads, eyes hollow, uniforms torn. They looked like men who had survived the end of the world. Maybe they had. Near Saint-Lambert they found Cavanaugh. He sat on the ground beside his Firefly, smoking. The crew had painted 17 white rings on the turret. 17 kills in 12 days. "Felix," Webb said. Cavanaugh looked up, didn't stand. "Griffin, Callum, Kid." Hartley bristled at being called Kid. Decided he didn't have the energy to argue. Cavanaugh offered his cigarettes. They sat beside him, smoked in silence. "I found a Panther crew this morning," Cavanaugh finally said. 4 bodies burned. I pulled their dog tags. Thought maybe someone should know what happened to them." He held up 4 pieces of stamped metal. German dog tags. Someone's sons, someone's brothers. "What will you do with them?" Webb asked. "Red Cross. They forward them. Families get notified." More silence. "They were soldiers," Cavanaugh said quietly. "Same as us. Different flags, different orders, but in the end, we all bled the same." Thorne looked at the dog tags in Cavanaugh's palm. 4 men who would never go home. He thought about the 18 executed Canadians at Orry, hands tied, shot in the head. Then he thought about the thousands of German dead in the pocket, most of them Wehrmacht, regular army, not war criminals, Just conscripts who had the misfortune of being on the losing side. War didn't care about distinctions like that. Yeah, Thorne said. Same as us. They finished their cigarettes. In the distance, a convoy of trucks approached, carrying more prisoners to the rear. The war continued, but here, in this pocket of devastation, it felt finished. That afternoon, General Dwight Eisenhower toured the battlefield, supreme commander of Allied forces. He had seen combat in the previous war, had commanded operations across 2 continents, was not a man given to exaggeration or emotion. He stood in the corridor near Trun, looked at the destruction, turned to his aide. Make sure this is documented, he said quietly. Photographed, recorded. Yes, sir. Eisenhower was silent for a long moment. Scenes that could be described only by Dante. It was literally possible to walk for hundreds of yards at a time, stepping on nothing but dead and decaying flesh. The aide wrote it down. Later, Eisenhower met with Ashford at Corps headquarters. General, Eisenhower said, your night attack, your innovations, they broke them. Ashford shook his hand. My men broke them, sir. I just gave them the tools. The firefly, the kangaroo, the artificial moonlight. None of that was in the playbook. No, sir, we wrote our own playbook. Eisenhower studied the maps, showing the extent of the breakthrough. How many fireflies did you lose? Ashford consulted his reports. 60% of Firefly crews became casualties, highest rate in the armored units. Because the Germans hunted them specifically. Yes, sir, priority targets, but every Firefly that died took an average of 8 German tanks with it. Eisenhower absorbed that. And the kangaroos? Saved thousands of infantry lives, maybe tens of thousands. We're still calculating. I want detailed after-action reports, everything. The American and British armies need to learn from this. They'll have them, sir. Eisenhower prepared to leave, stopped at the door. General Ashford, the German army in the West will not recover from what happened here. You understand that? Yes, sir. Your Canadians did that, your innovation. Your refusal to accept that superior German tanks meant inevitable German victory. Ashford said nothing. Make sure they know, Eisenhower said. Make sure your men know what they accomplished. Then he was gone. Ashford returned to his maps, to his casualty reports, to the cold mathematics of victory. Innovation had defeated superior equipment. Adaptation had overcome prepared defenses. Determination had outlasted German experience, but the cost was measured in names, in regiments reduced to fractions of their strength, in crews that would never go home, the Sherbrooke Fusiliers. 147 killed, 89 wounded, the Fort Garry Horse. 134 killed, the 1st Hussars. 128 killed, the British Columbia Regiment, the Ontario Regiment, the Governor-General's Horse Guards. The list continued. Ashford had commanded in Sicily, in Italy. He understood that victory required sacrifice, but understanding didn't make it easier. He wrote in his diary that night, "We won through adaptation. The Germans had better tanks. We had better thinking. In war, that is often the difference, but I will carry the names of the men who paid for that difference for the rest of my life." September 1944. Belgium. The Canadian units that survived Normandy pushed east, through France, into Belgium. The war continued, but for 48 hours some crews got leave. Thorne's crew sat in a liberated cafe in Brussels. The proprietor didn't have much. Watered-down beer, bread that was more sawdust than wheat. But it was the first time they'd been inside a building with a roof in 3 months. Hartley's leg was healing. He walked with a limp that would probably never go away. But he walked. Webb had been promoted, lieutenant to captain. He wore the new rank like it didn't matter. Because it didn't, they sat at a corner table, drank the bad beer, didn't talk. The silence was comfortable, the silence of men who had been through things together that couldn't be explained to anyone else. Finally, Hartley spoke. "What do we do after?" "After what?" Thorne asked. After the war, when it's over, what do we do?" Thorne considered. He had been a fisherman in Nova Scotia before. That life seemed impossibly distant now. "Go back to fishing, I suppose. Try to forget." Webb shook his head. "We won't forget." "No," Thorne agreed, "but we can try." Hartley looked at his hands, scarred, calloused, changed. "I don't know if I can go back to the farm. I don't know if I fit there anymore." "You'll fit," Webb said. "It'll take time, but you'll fit." None of them believed it, but saying it helped. A group of infantry came into the café, among them Marchand, his Quebec section, or what remained of it. 7 men had started Normandy with him. 3 sat at the table now. Marchand saw Thorne's crew, came over. "The Firefly men," he said. "May we join you?" "Yeah." They pulled chairs over, ordered more of the terrible beer. "Your kangaroo," Thorne said. "It survive?" Marchand shook his head. "Mine hit a mine near Chambois, tracks destroyed, but it got us there alive. That was all it needed to do." "How many did they build?" 76, I heard, converted from old priests and rams. They're making more now. Americans want them. British want them." "Good." More silence. One of Marchand's riflemen, young, spoke up. "Is it true, about the Tiger Ace, that you killed him?" Thorne exchanged glances with Webb. 3 Fireflies engaged 3 Tigers that day. We don't know who killed who. But he's dead. "Yeah, he's dead." The rifleman seemed satisfied with that. They drank, told lies about other battles, avoided talking about the ones that mattered. At some point, someone started singing, an old French song. Marchand joined in, then others. Thorne didn't know the words, but he listened. For 48 hours, the war was somewhere else. Then they returned to it. October 1944, Holland. Webb was killed during the assault on Bergen-op-Zoom. A German sniper, 1 shot. He died before the medics arrived. Thorne and Hartley attended the field burial, stood in the rain while the chaplain read words that meant nothing and everything. A new lieutenant took Webb's place in the Firefly. Young, fresh from England, competent enough. But it wasn't the same. The new lieutenant was competent, followed doctrine, made sound decisions. But he wasn't Webb. Webb had known when to follow orders and when to improvise, had understood his crew, had kept them alive through Normandy when better crews died. Thorne and Hartley didn't talk about it, not during the funeral, not after. But in the quiet moments, loading ammunition or cleaning the gun, they both felt the absence. A crew was more than positions and roles. It was trust built under fire, understanding without words. They had that with Webb, the new lieutenant. They had to learn all over again. By the time they did, the war was nearly over. They fought on, through Holland, into Germany. The Firefly kept running, kept killing. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, they had 24 confirmed kills marked on the turret. Thorne had stopped counting at 17. June 1945. England. Demobilization. The slow process of turning soldiers back into civilians. Thorne and Hartley stood on the dock at Southampton, waiting for the ship that would take them home to Canada. They had said goodbye to the Firefly 3 weeks earlier, watched it being driven to a depot somewhere, destined for scrap, probably, or maybe a museum. The 17-pounder that had kept them alive through France and Belgium and Holland and Germany, reduced to spare parts. "Seems wrong," Hartley had said. "Everything about this is wrong," Thorne replied. Now, waiting for the ship, Hartley spoke again. "You ever think about Webb?" "Every day," Thorne thought. But he said, Sometimes. He saved us. The way he commanded. The decisions he made. Yeah. I want to do something. After. Something that matters. Like he did. Thorne looked at the kid from Saskatchewan. 21 years old now. An old man's eyes in a young man's face. You will, Thorne said. You already did. Well, the ship's horn sounded. Time to board. They picked up their kit bags, joined the line of veterans heading home. Behind them, Europe began the long process of rebuilding. In front of them, Canada waited. Home, family. A future that seemed both impossibly close and impossibly far. They climbed the gangway, found their berths, slept. For the first time in 11 months, they slept without the sound of artillery in the distance. 2024, Ottawa, Canadian War Museum. The Sherman Firefly sits in the main gallery, preserved, restored. A plaque beside it reads, Sherman VC Firefly, served with the Sherbrooke Fusiliers 1944 to 1945. Equipped with the British 17-pounder anti-tank gun, the Firefly was the only Allied tank capable of reliably defeating German Panthers and Tigers at range. One of 2,139 built. A grandfather brings his grandson. The boy is 12. Interested in tanks. That's a Sherman, the boy says. But the gun is different. It's a Firefly, the grandfather explains. Canadian crews used them in Normandy. Did it work? It worked. The boy studies the long barrel. The 17-pounder that changed the war. How many tanks did it kill? The grandfather shakes his head. Ask instead how many Canadians it saved. They move to the next exhibit. Behind them, the Firefly sits silent. A relic of a war fought 80 years ago by men now mostly gone, but what they built endures. The Kangaroo became the armored personnel carrier. The night attack techniques became doctrine. The integration of specialist vehicles became standard. Innovation born from necessity. Adaptation forged under fire. The lessons of the Bocage never forgotten. 1994, Normandy, 50th anniversary of D-Day. Callum Thorne was 77 years old, retired fisherman, grandfather of 4. He hadn't spoken in detail about the war in 49 years, but when the invitation came to return to Normandy for the anniversary, he accepted. The Canadian government flew him over, put him up in a hotel in Caen, arranged tours of the battlefields. He stood at Bretteville-sur-Lai's Canadian War Cemetery, walked among the 2,957 white headstones, each one a Canadian who never made it home, found Webb's name, Captain Griffin Webb, killed in action, October 1944, age 26. Thorne stood there for a long time. Other veterans moved through the cemetery, some with families, some alone, all of them remembering. A historian approached, young woman, probably half Thorne's age. Mr. Thorne, I recognized you from the regimental photo. May I ask you some questions? I suppose. She had a notepad, a recorder. You were a Firefly gunner. Is that correct? Yes. The 17-pounder, very effective against German armor. When it hit, your crew is credited with destroying a Tiger on August 8, 1944, near Gaumesnil. Is that accurate? Thorne thought about that day, about 3 Fireflies firing simultaneously, about the chaos and the smoke and the impossibility of knowing. 3 crews engaged 3 Tigers. We all fired, we all hit. I don't know which shell killed which tank. But the German ace, Hartmann, he was among them. So they say. Does it matter to you who fired the killing shot? Thorne considered. No, he finally said. What mattered was stopping them. All of us did that. Who gets the credit is for historians to argue about. She scribbled notes. What made the Firefly crews effective? The gun helped, but it was the men behind it. We were fishermen, farmers, clerks. We learned fast because we had to. Were you afraid? Every single day. But you kept fighting. We didn't have a choice. She asked more questions. Thorn answered some, declined others. Finally, she asked, "What do you want people to remember about what you did here?" Thorn looked across the cemetery, at the rows of white stones, at the names. Remember that we were everyday Canadians, nothing special, just men doing a job that needed doing. And remember the ones who didn't come home. They're the ones who paid the price. The historian thanked him, left him alone with the headstones. Thorn walked back to Webb's grave, placed his hand on the stone. "We made it work, Griffin. The Firefly, the crew, all of it. You got us through Normandy. Wish you'd made it through the rest." The stone offered no reply. Thorn stood there until the shadows grew long. Then he left. That night, at the veterans' reception, he met Hartley. Dex Hartley was 70, had gone back to Saskatchewan after the war. Farmed for 40 years, raised 3 kids. They shook hands, sat together. "You came," Thorn said. "Couldn't miss it. 50 years. You still think about it?" "Every day," Hartley said. "Some things you don't forget." They sat in silence, comfortable, familiar. "I looked up our record," Hartley said. "After the war, the Firefly program, they built 2,139 of them, served until 1945. And then? Scrapped mostly. A few went to museums. Shame. The Kangaroo, though, that changed things. Americans built their own. British kept making them. Led to all the armored personnel carriers we have now." Marchand would be pleased. He should be. His idea saved thousands of lives. More silence. "Do you ever regret it?" Thorn asked. "Any of it?" Hartley took a long time to answer. "No, we did what needed doing, stopped something worse, paid the price to do it, no regrets." Thorn nodded. They stayed at the reception for another hour, then returned to their hotels. Tomorrow they would visit the battlefields, walk the ground where they had fought 50 years ago. But tonight, here, among the other veterans, they were understood. That was enough. The next morning, before the official ceremonies began, Thorn returned to the cemetery alone. Dawn light touched the white headstones. 2,957 Canadians who never left France. He found Webb's grave again. Captain Griffin Webb, age 26, killed in action, October 1944. Thorn had carried this for 50 years. The names, the faces, the ones who didn't make it home. He knelt beside the stone, placed his hand on the cold marble. "We did it, Griffin, broke them at Normandy, drove them all the way to Germany. The Firefly worked. The tactics worked. Everything you taught us." A pause. "I'm the last one now from our crew. Hartley's still around, but..." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. "I wanted you to know we didn't waste it, the chance you gave us. We lived good lives. Tried to be worth it." The stone offered no answer, just his name and dates, a life reduced to numbers. Thorn stood, his knees protested, 77 years old and feeling every one of them. He walked back through the rows, past names he recognized, past crews he'd known, past boys who never got to be old men. At the cemetery gate, he turned back. The morning sun lit the field of white stones. Perfect, peaceful, eternal. This was the price. This was what victory cost. 18,444 Canadians in the Northwest Europe campaign, each one a name, a family, a future that never was. Thorn touched the brim of his cap, a final salute. Then he left. Behind him, the dead kept their vigil. In front of him, the living world waited. He had carried their memory for 50 years. He would carry it the rest of the way home.